Hey, it's Jessica Goose here with RealAgriculture.com, and I am at the Grow Canada Conference. Joining me right now is keynote speaker James Garriss, who is the Director of Research and Development for Browning Media. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, you spoke today all about weather, which has definitely been a friend and a foe to farmers this past year.
Indeed.
And going forward, it's not too much our friend, at least what we're looking at. So, James, first off, wanted to start off about what are we seeing as far as oceanic activity? That was one thing that you kind of started right off the bat with your presentation.
Right. So the reason that we focus on oceanic activity is the heat or the cold aspects of the ocean, the Pacific and the Atlantic, are the key fundamental impactors in long-term weather and climate trends for North America. And currently, when we don't have a short-term El Niño or La Niña or volcanic eruption impacting the ocean's temperatures, we are seeing a cold Pacific, which creates drying conditions for basically the states and the provinces that would be east or west of the Rockies. And then we have the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is at its peak of heat, which means we're having more intense storm activities, which is one of the reasons we've been seeing more hurricanes. Yeah. It's one of the reasons that we've been having tropical storms make it all the way up to Nova Scotia and to Quebec. It's the snow that you've been getting in summertime, the wine crop that died out a couple years ago from a frost in June. We are at the extreme of both the Pacific and the Atlantic, and it is creating for North America the most difficult weather patterns that it can have in the 80-year cycle that these two ocean patterns can create. The good news is that in theory, and we'll see how it progresses over the next 5 to 10 years, but within the next 5 to 10 years, we may start seeing an ease up on some of the extreme droughts, the extreme storms. Doesn't mean we won't have them, but it means they should start being a little calmer.
Yeah, and that's one thing I think that we've been hearing is that, or at least I've been hearing with the older generation of farmers is, you didn't experience, the harvest back in 1980, right?
Right.
However, there are saying it's a bit of a repeat. It's kind of this year, it's people have dubbed it the harvest from hell, especially in the prairies.
Oh, yeah.
If you look in Ontario or if you look out in the East Coast, like you said, their weather conditions with the amount of moisture that they had or the lack of moisture is just, it's unfathomable, right? It's horrible to see that these farmers are dealing with that. However, hopefully we can get out of this trend. Now, one thing that is different for next year is that we're not going to be getting something. And what is that?
So we will not have an El Nino or a La Nina influencing the weather patterns for 2020. And this is the first time that has happened in the last 5 years. The past 5 years, we've had an El Nino or a La Nina. And in fact, in the last 25 years, we've only had 4 years that haven't had an El Nino or a La Nina. But almost all models are indicating we will have neither. What this means, and we'll get into more detail when we do the more broad outlook for weather, is that we can anticipate a drier Western North America and a wetter Eastern North America, but without the intensity of the storms that we had, say, last year. So we're not anticipating the flood that hit Ontario and parts of the prairie provinces in March and April. But where there will still be some rain. Secondary to that is, unlike if a La Nina was occurring, we don't anticipate the Great Lakes to have the March and April freeze over, creating the refrigerator impact. But the bad news is we do believe that when we start getting into especially summertime, British Columbia will probably have some more extreme droughts and a higher risk of forest fires. So, unfortunately, I wish I could just give good news, but the weather, especially when we're looking at a full country or continent, the weather's never going to work that way.
It's definitely give and take. But if you were to take some good news out of that, it is going to be more of an ease into it.
Correct.
Rather than a, hey, hello, I'm here.
Right.
What am I dealing with now today?
Yeah,
right?
no snowstorm that produces 6 feet of snow in a 24-hour period or anything like that.
Well, that's good news for sure. And so you mentioned it there, the outlook. What are we seeing as far as, Eastern and Western Canada for winter months and then leading into spring proceeding?
Well, I took a big gamble, and I decided that through our research, it will snow in northern Canada through winter. I know it was a stretch, but there have been a couple winters where the snow doesn't come until February or March. So, if I made that joke 5 years ago, it rings a lot more clear than today, where I've had clients that have said, we didn't get snow until late February, or we did, but 1/10 of what we normally get. So through the remaining winter months, basically in early winter, kind of think of what the type of weather that you were having in 2008, 9, and 10. Not the extremes, but the more mellow aspect that you kind of experienced in January and February. And with that, we're seeing an increase in precipitation and slightly colder conditions, basically east of Saskatchewan, kind of starting into Manitoba and moving easternly in that direction. The storm activity is not going to be as intense, so it will be snowstorms where you'll get several inches over a week as opposed to several inches in a couple hours.
Yeah.
Pardon me, sorry about that.
Good.
On the western side, because the weather is oftentimes impacted by the pull of cold air from the northern poles, and when it comes when it swings down, it almost creates a blockade, a shield of where the cold and precipitation hits. So west so basically starting around southwestern Saskatchewan and into Alberta and British Columbia, we're looking at somewhat drier conditions, especially in late winter. Early winter, you're still going to get some more storm activity for a variety of reasons. I'm very sorry.
No, that's okay.
So we're looking at drier conditions into winter. Winter in general is going to kind of last a little longer, so it's going to last into late March and early April. But we're not looking at, like I said, no refrigerator impact from the Great Plains, and no massive drought or huge snowstorms happening in mid to late April. Instead, we're looking at kind of what people consider to be more normal. And we're going to see that trend continue into the United States, where your Corn Belt and your northern plains are going to have a later winter and get some good soil moisture. But east or west of the Rockies, your Californias, your Oregons, Washingtons, it's going to be relatively dry and not as much precipitation.
And would you say that's obviously different than the couple past years? If I can recall, I'm pretty sure BC's moisture was somewhat relatively normal, as well as parts of Alberta. I mean, we've definitely had pockets where it's drought-like conditions, right?
Right.
But is this kind of that flop that you're seeing, where it is going to be completely different than what we've had in the past couple of years?
So we're not looking at an opposite. It's not going to be an opposite where last year you had a lot of snow and then you had no, so you'll have none, or vice versa. I think what it more is going to be is that basically west of Saskatchewan, you'll still have snow. It's just it's going to be in patches. It's not going to be one severe snowstorm that gives you all the snow for the month. It's going to be 2 or 3, but it won't be as much as you've had. What a lot of the farmers, what a lot of ag people would consider normal snow. And when we get east, similar scenario where it's going to be more snow than what most farmers would consider to be average snow, but once again, not the extreme precipitation patterns.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, as always.
My pleasure. Thank you.